The following podcast is sponsored by Basico. At Basico, we understand your needs and pain points. Our expertise in CFO services, legal, finance IT, and people and payroll helps drive your business forward by inspiring change and challenging norms. We believe in deep explorative discussions and critical angles, the same spirit that fuels the Only Constant podcast hosted by our own Lasse Rindom. Discover more about Basico's vision and services at basico.dk. And if you like what you hear in this episode, please don't hesitate to share it with a friend. And now Lasse, take it away.
You are listening to The Only Constant, a podcast where we go beyond the usual discussions in technology and business and aim to explore more than explain. Join me for engaging discussions with a diverse range of global thought leaders as we seek to uncover new perspectives and insights in a free-flowing conversation. My guest today is Nikki Barua, and I am your host, Lasse Rindom. Hi, Nikki, and welcome to The Only Constant. I've been really looking forward to speaking with you today, and we've had a couple of postponements, mostly on me. So I'm just really happy that we finally got around to doing this episode today. So welcome, Nikki, to The Only Constant.
Me too. I've been so looking forward to this conversation because I know it's going to be thought-provoking and an exploration that hopefully leaves both of us wiser along with your audience.
That's exactly what we're aiming for. But let's just dive into the conversation, right, Nikki? So what is, in your opinion, the biggest change that we're currently seeing from generative AI? Big one.
Big one is the shift into agentic AI. That's been the biggest change that has had the most significant impact in how work gets done, how productivity and returns are unleashed. But most importantly, it's also shifting management techniques and people and culture. To me, that's the more fascinating aspect that's probably not talked about as much. But that's the thing that I've not only experienced firsthand in how I'm running my business with AI agents, but also the work that we're doing with large enterprises and seeing it have the most significant shift internally. That's fascinating to watch.
So you said the change that, or the impact that agentic AI has had, and you said that in the past tense. I think a lot of people feel like that we're talking about agentic AI and AI all the time, but they are still looking for these big use cases. Or where, I know we've talked about use cases for years, but I still, just today I heard someone say, okay, but where is it actually, where is it actually doing it? I know about cloud code, right? But how many companies are actually having agents make these big decisions across workflows end-to-end processes, Nikki?
Yeah, I can't say that it's been that scale adoption yet. I think we're still very much in the early innings. My point about this taking root is it's happening faster than even the early stage of AI adoption in companies, where it was very experimental of kind of saying, oh, we just bought a whole bunch of Claude licenses or ChatGPT licenses, and then we mandated all of our employees to use it, and then they were still not getting enough adoption, and it was very experimental in nature. This feels different in that it's more focused on clear use cases of saying, okay, here's a use case that actually makes sense. Is it all the way to the end where there's no human in the loop and an entire function is made agentic? No, it's not there. But there's enough use cases that are driving personal productivity or team collaboration and handoffs that are meaningful returns, and also elevating sort of the AI fluency of the teams and culture in meaningful ways.
But do you think, you said it's not no human in the loop. I have two questions, actually. Will we get to no human in the loop, do you think?
I hope not.
No, but I think, what were you thinking? Because whenever I ask that question, I am thinking about so many, layers where at some point there'll be a human in the loop, right? Don't you do the same? There will always be a human somewhere, right?
I mean, look, I wish we had a crystal ball to know where things will be 10 years from now, because at the speed and scale at which things are unfolding, it's both exciting and it's terrifying, because there's parts that only a handful of people in the world are frankly controlling. If you really think about it, the decision makers of the major research labs are controlling things that will affect our entire civilization. And you and I can talk ad nauseum about our point of view, but we have no direct influence into that. So that's the part that's hard to predict, to not know where things will unfold and how it might unfold. And so I may say, well, I think human in the loop is an important criteria and never losing that. But there may be use cases of certain functions and things where it's designed that way, regardless of an individual's opinion. And so that's the part that will unfold. And I think some areas do lend themselves probably better, where you can build enough rules and guardrails around that, that it can work completely autonomously. But the bigger question is if, what is the real purpose that we're aiming for?
It seems like what you're saying is, I think Thor Dankert on the podcast 1.5 years ago, he said that, and this is not on him necessarily, but he just said on the podcast that if it's technically viable, it will become ethically feasible or something like that, right? Then you will say it's okay. Is that the fear that you're expressing here, that, some people will just be doing it?
I think that's exactly, it actually captures it really well. Just because something is technically viable doesn't make it the right answer.
No.
On a human level, even if it's not violating ethics, it's the question is, what are the implications for humanity in general by doing so? Is it a net positive? Does it move us forward? Or is it pursuing something just because you can?
I think Pascal Bonnet said that on the pod, that who wants AGI? Humans don't want AGI. He just said it directly. It's not for us. It's good for some people who build technology, but it's not something we need, because it's sort of putting us out of the loop, right? Do you agree with that in some way? So there's a limit to when it's productive for us. So the thing is just what is it we're doing it for, Nikki?
I think about the AGI topic in context of framing it differently, in that what needs to be true for AGI to be positive for humanity? What else needs to be true? So, for example, does it mean redesigning public policy? Does it mean changing our concept of profession and work? What does it do to the education system? What does it do to human connection? All of those things. What else needs to be in place? What else needs to be true in order for AGI to be a net positive? And if you don't have answers to any of those and you still pursue it, the consequences will be irreversible. And that's the danger. And that's what I mean about there's a handful of people really defining this future at a speed and scale that even they aren't controlling, and the impact will be felt by all 8 billion people.
But that's exactly, I think, I had a question saying that, or I thought the way you framed this, that a handful of people, right? That seems like you and me and every other thought leader can only be reactive to what's actually going on. But what you just did was say, okay, but we can be reactive, but we can also try to be proactive to say, what does it take to make AGI a positive change? Because if it happens, we need to make sure we've had the right discussions about governance and ethics and policies, right? So you're actually trying to take action and not just sit back and wait for something to happen to you, right?
Exactly. And that's something we all have to engage in, because that's the civic responsibility. Earlier, we were talking about Denmark and the public policy there and how it actually impacts the citizens and the choices they make, and how it leads to the design of a certain kind of society. It's the same idea. You take away the need for humans and you leave billions of people feeling worthless. It's not just about worrying about affluence and prosperity and income and being able to pay your bills. Maybe there's answers for that, whether it's UBI or something else. But the question is, what happens to purpose and worth? What happens to mental health? What happens to, a sense of control and autonomy? There's so many implications of that deserve thoughtful, intentional, and timely public policy design. It requires intentional rethinking of the education system. And it certainly demands a lot of responsibility for business leaders to think about what does that mean for the future of work? What does that look like?
I'm not trying to be negative here, right? But I think it's very easy if you've read a little bit. And I've studied history, right? So it's very easy to become a pessimist because I think sociological literature and history literature about on estrangement, right? With modernity, it doesn't lack these theories or these what do you call it? Estrangement theories and seeing that happen in modernity, right? And we didn't sort of fix that, did we? The bowling alone as well, right? All that, how we disengage from things. Are you positive we can, with a potent tool in technology like AI and potentially AGI, that we will be able to retain worth and purpose and not be estranged, right?
So I'm actually a huge optimist about this, and here's why. For me, the reason I feel optimism is I deeply believe in the human ability to adapt to change and simply survive. We've existed as a species for a reason, and I think no matter how we evolve and adapt, we will find a way. And that's the part I trust, that somehow we will find a way. Not only to survive this, but actually continue to be masters of the universe, if you will. And in that,
because I was gonna say chicken. Chickens are the most, the most populous animal on the planet but they don't have a good life, right? So
right, and so the adapting, but also continuing to have control over the technology in some shape or form. How it comes to pass, I don't have a point of view on that, but I do believe that this will be a net positive outcome, no matter how painful the process of getting there is and how many people get displaced in that process as well. What the future of work looks like to me is, a reversal of the industrial age. What the industrial age did of taking people from human beings to human doings. We just turned into machines that operated 9 to 5 and did these predefined boxes of tasks.
Replaceable
being
parts,
freed of that drudgery and being freed of those time frames and locations where you have to go to a certain place and work for a certain amount of time and do a certain task and only what you've been assigned. Being freed of that is liberation, and being elevated to higher level thinking, intellectual and creative pursuits, to me feels like a new kind of renaissance.
But I now I mentioned the pessimist of view, right? But I think I usually say, and I've said this on the podcast as well many times, that I have a hope or a hunch that we will stop consuming before we are consumed ourselves, right? Also because, buying vinyls, I've always used that example. And one of the things that struck me a week ago, like a peculiarity, it's not something maybe novel, but just that we are in a time and age where we can work from everywhere in the whole world with digital technologies, yet everyone is moving to the city. And that paradox is at once, means that, we're so irrational, right? And at one, it can both bode, badly, saying that, okay, but we'll just do that to be more strange, live in these big cities and be no one, be a cog in the modern machine or the industrial machine. But it also means that we are erratic, right? And you can't predict it based on, saying humans will be obsolete. Oh, but humans will find a way not to be obsolete because we'll do the opposite of what you expect. So for me, it can go both ways. And I'm just
I mean, you're basically describing the stock market.
Yeah.
It's like, ask any economist, right? You can have the perfect model. You just forgot to like put in that concept of human, irrational behavior. But I'm curious. I have a point of view about the whole moving to the city thing, even from my own lived experience. I'm curious why you think that is happening.
Well, I think it's because to some extent the purpose of living in the countryside has been lost, and I think modernity or post-modernity has made identity sort of evaporate or become something fluid. And I think that what we do when we move to the city, we do it because we want to have the identity of being a city dweller. So it's very much identity driven. I live in this part of the city. I'm a city person. I pay this high rent like all the other ones who live here and pay this high rent. And I drink this coffee here, and it very much becomes a monoculture with that identity, but also feels like there's this weird thing of, we all wear the same costumes. We're not estranged from each other, but we're still in costumes, right? There's something, if you go to the countryside, you might meet these hillbillies, who dress weird and do weird things, and they don't fit into any boxes. Are they the ones who are really free, or is it the ones who move to the city to try to realize themselves? I'm very much conflicted on that, but I'm very sure it's an identity thing that drives us there, right? Saying that I'm included.
Yeah.
What do you think?
The natural desire to belong, of belonging to a tribe and feeling accepted.
What's a tribe in the countryside, right? Farming, that's so, that's so extended. You don't need humans there anymore. There's no identity there. There's no story there anymore, right? It's just big machines doing it.
So I'm very much a city person, and I also was born and raised in one of the biggest cities in the world, in Mumbai. And so,
why, Nikki? Why are you a city person?
So for me, it's actually the diversity that I find in a urban population where I feel a greater sense of belonging. So I absolutely agree about your observation that it's identity and belonging that drives that. And that's what I found in every major city. And I've lived in so many major cities that I'm more likely to find that tribe where I feel connected in the diversity of an urban landscape. So I don't see the urban landscape as one monolithic culture. I see many different subcultures within that where I'm more likely to find my people, if you will. The X-Men within that I can relate to. The other part of it is a lot of my personal interests and hobbies revolve around things that an urban culture offers, whether it's art or dining and theater,
like all the other urban dwellers, right?
Yeah, so so a lot of those interests are very much in those places. But one thing I did discover, even though I was not raised that way, I mean, I had no exposure to small towns or countryside at all. But living in America and kind of exploring smaller towns and even the suburbs and all of that, what I discovered was sort of a split personality for myself, where I found that part of the year I love being in the city and the intensity. And for me, the other thing that I find very attractive in big cities is the high density of talent and intellect. The per square feet, like the density of talent you get in Manhattan, for example, compare that to any other place. I mean, there's something very powerful about that, because you put yourself in the right environment. You don't need willpower to raise the bar for you. The environment raises the bar for you, and you just become the next version of yourself. There's something that comes out of you, an intrinsic drive or motivation or, or competition, whatever that might be. Your results grow by being in the right environment. It's sort of like joining the Olympian team versus the varsity team, right? But on the flip side, being in quieter countryside environments, I found are like bring me back to connection in nature. And it's what I have now started correlating with my thinking and writing time. So when I'm in those environments, it's like where I go inwards. It's, a lot of practices that are very isolated and comforting. And we are now spending our time exactly that way.
Just always, I I get your point about the city, right? And this is not going to be a city episode, right? But I always, part of my studies, I read Norbert Elias as well with the civilizing process, which sort of influenced me. He also influenced Foucault and all that a lot. And he talks about this when societies get bigger, right, and denser, they get stronger interdependence lines, he calls it, right? So they're interdependent, and that means that he traced that in books of manner. Right, how you were supposed to behave, meaning that the stronger the society became, the more the manners became inherent, and the more you internalize the violence. And my point is that in the city, to be in a big city like that, you can't go around being weird. You can be, some people are, but most people don't. You adhere to rules, you speak the same way, you go walk on the sidewalk the same way. Everyone sort of has to behave in that manner. So there's a lot of internalized violence that you don't necessarily have if you live in the countryside or as a hillbilly or redneck or whatever you are. You can sort of be, crazy. They're crazy people sometimes, right? Do you get my point?
Yeah.
But you're not crazy in the city. So that's why I'm saying, the violence there is also in this, you take on the same costume as everyone else. And are you really being yourself then? Or are you just being... I'm smart with the smart people, all the intellectual people are here, and I'm intellectual with the intellectual people because I'm in the room where all the intellectual people are. I'm an arty person because I go to this art gallery with all the other arty person people. You get my drift, and I know how to drink from a glass of wine with the arty people, and I don't drink weirdly.
There's a conformity that comes about.
That's like the big wave, and the other things like contours on the top. I feel the individualism is a contour, but the big wave is conformity. Hipster culture. It's like the most monocultural thing in the world, and it's built around the idea that you're individualistic. You can look and wear the sweater you want and have the beard you want. Yeah, like everyone else. You get. It's. It just.
So what's fascinating is, as we're talking about urban versus rural culture and conformity versus individualism, isn't it interesting to kind of see similar things emerge even in the context of AI?
Yes, exactly, and that was what I wanted to get to as well, because I spoke to Walter Quattrociocchi on this professor from Rome on a podcast a couple of episodes back, where he said that he studied social media and found that the language there had all pre-AI had sort of become more less. What do you call it? Become more mono language. So it had been simpler. The words were not. You didn't use that much flowery language as you used to do in the beginning of social media. It became more, the way of writing. And now with the AI, that is amplifying like crazy. So the globalization, the culture of social media, and with AI infused, becomes this monoculture again, where we speak in the same way, right? And so it's supposed to be liberating, but in a way it is, like you can make now. Oh, sorry, I'm rambling here, but now you can make and you can make an AI photo of yourself, right? But that's not you, Nikki. And the problem is that when you then meet me, will you be embarrassed that you don't look like the photo you sent to me? And will that be a problem for you to meet me, right? I think that's interesting.
Well, actually, I'm much better than that AI-generated photos.
Yes, exactly. But it's like someone who's a Christian or something like that, or some kind of religion, and he's a sinner. Well, so he feels because he knows his sin, he feels separated from God. So the sin becomes the problem, and there's this labeling.
Well, so it's a loss of authenticity. But if you peel back the layer to say, why are people willing to trade their authenticity to have something that's so homogenous and mass produced, if you will, right? If it's AI generated slop, it all sounds the same and all of that. So why are we willing to trade authenticity to do that? And I think it just comes to a natural affinity for instant gratification and ease. We like comfort. We don't like struggle. And guess what? Original thinking and writing requires. It requires struggle. You're dealing with resistance, cognitive resistance to an idea that you're trying to make sense of and connect the dots and turn those thoughts into words and words into content that resonates, and all of that requires sitting in the pain. And that's hard. And so now you have a machine where you can click a button and you can skip the pain, skip the struggle, and get to something that sounds pretty damn good. It's average, but it's pretty damn good than the blank sheet of paper you had before that. So what's really happening is cognitive atrophy. That's the real problem. Is it's not about the content sounding the same. The real problem is the loss of the art of thinking.
Yeah, I completely agree, and it also makes me think that people don't necessarily need an AI strategy; they need a friction strategy. To say where does it make sense to have friction, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Where should you have? I always use the example that you're also in a consultancy, right? So it's if you replaced all of your interactions with your clients with an AI email, all of them, all of it, right? You wouldn't have many clients, right? There's this, relationships are very important in that field. So you need to discuss, where do we not want AI? That's the discussion your AI strategy should be focusing on, right? Don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it requires intentional design, because if you simply focus on automation and efficiency, it's a race to the bottom. At some point, you will run out of more efficiency to gain and more automation to do. But what you've erased is, original thinking, original value, and frankly, the only thing that will be your competitive moat.
I was just going to say competitive edge. I was just going to say that. I was just going to say your competitive edge. Exactly. Yeah. You're losing that. You're becoming a monoculture.
Public data that AI has, it's like tap water. Everybody has access to it. So, there's nothing special about it. If you think of it like electricity, it's just infrastructure. The question is, what do you use that electricity to power that's your original creation? And if you don't have intentional design, workforce design, or team design, or culture design around that, you're simply looking at automation and efficiency and actually eroding your moat as you're doing so.
But that's it. That's a brilliant quote, Nikki, and I've said this also to a lot of students at universities when I speak to them, that if you have to, they're like, oh, I have to read this Gadamer, I have to read this Habermas or whatever, terrible philosophers, and I just get resume from AI. And I say, but if you can't think that, if you can't read that and think that, you will become an extension only of AI. And AI is commodity, meaning that, like tap water, it's worthless. It's close to worthless. And if you're only an extension of a commoditized, almost worthless good, then you're worthless,
Yeah. Well, so here's how, the value of talent has changed even in the last, let's say, 2 to 3 years versus before. There was, we always talked about having A players at work, and then there's B players and C players and all of that, right? Well, C players are gone. There's no room for C players anymore. But B players are being replaced by AI, because everything AI generates is B player level. So effectively, you are irrelevant and massively at risk from having any value in the workplace. If you're C, you're already out. You're effectively, there's no market for a C player. A B player is at risk unless they figure out how to elevate themselves and leverage AI to gain the efficiency, but elevate themselves to A player quality and thinking. What all of this mass commoditization has done is actually made originality more valuable, because that's what's scarce, and anything that's scarce becomes more valuable.
True, and I think expertise is what I usually say. Expertise, right? And this is the.
And it's a different kind of expertise too, though, right? Like it's more like I think of it as T-shaped design, of like having depth in a discipline, but also having broad view to be able to connect dots across different specializations, because that's where you're able to see something that's unique point of view. Because if your specialization is only as a software developer, for example, your AI has taken over 60% of your job already.
But that is something I'm interested in, because I always forget what the opposite of a T-shaped person is. I know a T-shape, but is it square or what?
Yeah. Yeah, I have no idea. I have no idea.
No, but I know, funny.
Yeah.
But,
I think it's just the eye shape. You were just like, going deep in one area. I think
it's just broad all the time.
It's either horizontal or vertical specialization. But, like I remember as a kid being told, like, you have to, don't be a jack of all trades, be a master of one, right? Like that idea. But I did become a jack of all trades, but I also became a master in one area. And that became a T-shaped specialty. And I remember for years looking at people that only had one vertical like depth with admiration, thinking, wow, I wish I was like them, where their career was so linear and so like regimented, right? Like it was very predictable, and they became like the world's best expert in such and such thing. And when I look at my patchwork career, I've done this, I've done that, I've been across industries, being across disciplines, and I thought there was something wrong with it. But really the reason I was doing that was I always pursued my curiosity. I pursued my passion and curiosity and didn't put myself in a box of, oh, this is what I've been trained to do, so that's all I'm going to do. I was willing to try new things. Today, that's actually my greatest assets, that I can like connect dots across so many ecosystems and see patterns that others cannot. But I also have a lived experience that's very unique, and I have relationships and friendships across so many different domains that helps me get that collective intelligence that artificial intelligence cannot provide.
And you also have a high IQ, Nikki just admitted. But
I also have high EQ.
But I think that's one of my friends once said, I've always called myself a nerd, and then he said, but you're not a nerd because you know a little bit about everything. Nerds know a lot about one thing. You're not a nerd.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, what am I then? I nerd everything, but I'm not a nerd because I'm not deep enough. But I think, and this is something I feel I'm seeing right now, and this I'd love to discuss this with you. I've been thinking that roles and expertises would be blurring and evaporating and becoming these developers would have to know business, and business people will have to know the code, and everything would sort of mix together, right, with AI, because we would have to look across the entire value chain, right, because AI will do all of the specialization bits. But what I'm seeing, and I discussed it with a friend also the other day, and he sees the same, is that already where we have the best agentic capabilities right now in coding, you see IT people going rabbit hole deep on code skills and all that. They're not talking outcome. They're not even talking about what it is business needs. They're just talking tech stuff. So they're going full nerd, full specialization, full expertise. And in some ways, I think that whenever we've invented something new that has increased our ability to produce more, we always want more. We make the value chains longer, we make the processes longer, and we put in more specialized people at every step to control it. Aren't we just doing the same again? I know what you're saying with the other thing, but I feel that we're already moving out of this, weird in the middle of two S-curves, right, space, to go deep again. It's already happening. It's only crystallizing again into specializations.
I would say the nature of specializations and what specialization refers to is evolving. What used to be just study this one thing, master this one thing, and go deep in this one thing, and you don't need to know anything because you're going to have departmental handoffs, right? You're going to have like the business analyst, writes the business, outline, hands it off to the UX person, who hands it off to a designer, who then hands it off to a developer, to QA. They're all, each one specialized in their own field. No one looks at the big picture until you get senior enough, and then you're the one looking at the big picture, right? I think that's what's changing for two reasons. Number one, because especially AI agents can go across domains, or you can have a team of AI agents, each one in each of those functional domains. You, as the orchestrator of that, need to have a point of view and understanding to look at that big picture to be able to direct the right outcomes. And if you're only narrow in one area, say only in design or only in QA, you won't have enough wisdom and judgment to make the right decisions across the whole. So that gives you a lower advantage than someone who has that kind of T-shaped knowledge and perspective to guide a better outcome. Because if you both had, let's say each person, one's T-shaped individual and one's just a narrow specialist, they both have a team of 10 agents. The T-shaped specialist will get way better outcomes, higher quality, more original thinking, better ideas, and better innovation. And so to me, that's what the specialization, the leverage is just different in that. The other part that's also changing is because we're seeing so much of execution become commoditized and almost borderline free, that friction is gone. So what it elevates is craftsmanship. It's true craftsmanship, right? Of having original ideas and creativity that you now can use alongside AI to get breakthrough results. And we're seeing that even in engineering, it's playing out in engineering, right? Like there's finding that the average software developer, when they use AI, they're definitely able to increase their productivity, let's say by 2x, right? But the outstanding developers, the ones that are absolute world-class, they're 100xing the results. So yes, AI may have taken away a lot of the tasks, but the output you're getting and the outcomes you're generating are vastly different. So that just means that higher value people, higher value talent actually becomes even more valuable now.
Yeah, exactly. And we completely agree on that. But I think we will have fewer people maybe involved in each. What could if we have
handoffs?
But you have like we have like a meter or something like that, and then we used to have people for every 10 centimeters. I think we'll have specialized people maybe for every 5 centimeters now instead or something.
Absolutely, because you don't need that kind of like oversight and like quality
maybe we had 10
check
people for every 10 centimeters. Now we'll have one person per 2 centimeters or something like that. So it's
which is why we'll probably see middle management shrink in companies. I mean, if you think about the traditional role of the middle manager, it's
or grow
directing
because everyone becomes a middle manager.
Right. Yeah, or they become orchestrators of hybrid teams.
Yes.
But the traditional manager, not the title, but the traditional manager whose job was to oversee a team of people, individual contributors, and assign them tasks, get them to do the tasks and monitor the tasks. That's kind of like worthless if you really think about, like if that's all the value that you're bringing, it becomes pretty worthless unless there's something, you become the context provider and create more autonomy and more guardrails for people to create different kinds of value.
But maybe you can get me away from this thinking, because you talk about AI agents can go across, right? And it's about execution but I always think about accountability, right? That's a big problem, right? AI can be R and C and I, but it can never be the A in the hierarchy, right? So the problem is that, you said, you could ask a T-shaped person to do all that, but we've never really done that. Every approval process involves multiple different people from multiple different departments. And why should it be different in the future? Because accountability will always be ours, right? So you'll need people who are deeply specialized in these specific areas, right, to be able to be accountable for the outcome of an AI agent that does that. That doesn't have to be 5 people, but you need to have one everywhere. I'm preoccupied with accountability, and people are like, nah, we can always just, go, it's okay with a couple of errors, right? But I think, that's fine right now. But what we've always gone for is leading practice, right? And saying it's okay with a couple of errors. That's best practice. That's not leading customer service, right? It's just crap. That's just, run of the mill thing. And that's not what will differentiate you. So we'll need to have people who can be accountable on each critical step of a process. And that will require, and that's my point, specialization, expertise, not necessarily the T-shaped ones. You need to have a person who actually knows what's going on in this particular very specific thing where we're now producing 5,000 things where we used to do 50. He really needs to know that thing and not look at what the whole company is doing.
I don't think that goes away. I don't think that goes away, the need for having that kind of depth. And in fact, you need that kind of depth to be able to be accountable for the, what AI is producing.
Yeah, but what if he's looking at, the full thing, he's looking at a big business strategy. He shouldn't do that. Just look at this. This thing, please, because there's like 10x productivity there. You have to focus on that. Don't look at anything.
The key part of it, though, of looking at the big picture isn't about being accountable for the big picture. Your accountability still lies in the deep specialization. But being able to see across the board allows you to be accountable for the right outcomes in what you're accountable for. Because where I differentiate is being accountable for output versus outcomes. When AI can produce the output and it's programmed correctly, where you don't need to oversee, did it like churn out 10 lines of code, that's output. What you do need to be accountable for is, do those 10 lines of code produce the right business outcome? And
but we always had that before,
context,
right? We always had that before, Nikki. So my point is here, right, with everything we've been discussing, is is it really changing, or is it just accelerating, deepening, and are we gonna have more deep knowledge, or be more surfing the surface? I think it's I
think it's deep. I think it's more deep than, if anything, like I said, to me, being superficial and just having surface level knowledge is a B player.
But that's what people think. That's what people think we need with AI, right? People think we need to be surface level because AI will do all the deep stuff. But this is the opposite, right?
No, I think it's the exact opposite. I think the deep thinkers and the deep specialists and the deep craftsmen are really what's going to be needed, what's going to stand out, and what will actually be valuable. Because if your knowledge is equal to or less than AI, then how can you possibly be valuable or relevant? It just doesn't make sense.
Yes, exactly.
And it certainly won't make you the commander and the orchestrator of AI, because you don't know more in order to direct it. So I think that's why we will, and that's going back to our previous topic about optimism or pessimism. One of the things that makes me optimistic about the future is because I do believe that there will be a return to depth and substance. When average is free, deep specialization and depth of thinking and original ideas and creativity is what stands out.
So that also becomes sort of a bottleneck. And I wanted to touch upon the bottlenecks, right, for companies and for societies, right? We talked about friction. You mentioned at the beginning, we're seeing a lot of individual productivity go up, and good individual productivity right now with the agents we're having right now. But what we've known for decades is that, and since Fordism and all that, is that, value in enterprise is always, not just you getting more productive, but you getting more productive in alignment with your colleague, with their colleague, and with their departments and all that. You might become faster, Nikki, but if you don't produce anything I agree with, what does it matter, right? So a lot of things, I think the messaging that personal productivity will be transformation is like, what? When did we ever believe that? Okay, so the bottleneck, right? And right now there's this weird, the technology space is also filled with another two things, right? There's survivorship bias, right? A lot of people say, oh, it's going well, we're doing big AI, agentic, blah, everything, and blockbuster disruption bias. We're gonna, if you don't change now, you're gonna die. Most companies will not be either place, right? They will survive, but they will be, maybe dragging along, and they'll be, oh, this went very well, but they will not be, full survivorship. How do you chart a path between doom and deliverance, and how do you make sure that, how do you overcome what is the bottleneck, that you need to address to make sure that you jog along?
Well, what we're seeing across the board is what I coined the term strategic metabolism. Like your ability as a culture and an organization to metabolize change. And that the real bottleneck in there is trust, which is why it becomes a human and people and culture problem, not a technology and workflow and change management problem. Trust whether me working with AI is effectively me training my own replacement. Does it mean I'm going to be working my way out of a job? So my level of personal trust determines my level of adoption. My level of trust in the team or even my manager determines, what I'm willing to let go of and trust someone else picks it up. And those are not new problems. We've historically dealt with that when it comes to managing teams and dealing with conflict and all of that. But now you have an entirely new kind of entity where it's not just about human emotion. It's about artificial intelligence that becomes, you're dealing with the complexity of human emotions and machine intelligence that are both playing a role in that level of trust and how things play out and how change happens within that organization. And I think that's the resistance that will play out for a lot longer than any prediction about AI adoption at scale. The enterprise resistance to that is far greater at so many levels, because so far most of the conversation has been about individual level resistance. And so one of the easy answers of that is, if you've got people that are resisting that change, well, then just fire them, right? You can remove those people and then you have fewer resistors. But what that still doesn't address is what happens to the resistance of established processes? What happens to the resistance of handoffs and team collaborations and departmental structure, or even org models? Think about org models that were not designed
of customers, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Fire them.
I mean, yeah, like a lot of things where people are used to a certain way, and that's going to stick around a lot longer. And become the real sort of last mile challenge to solve. I think the technology evolution will far outpace the strategic metabolism.
I had this weird, you said this to a big SaaS company a couple of weeks ago that, your problem in AI is that you have customers. Congratulations. Congratulations. The world exists for you, right?
Yeah, like business without employees and customers would be a lot easier.
That's so easy, man. That's why, startups will kill the world. No, because startups will become big and then they'll have the same problems. I said this to someone today. I spoke to him and said, the world, the forest is made of big trees. Startups is an undergrowth, They're not the big trees. They don't matter. You don't map out the undergrowth. You map out the big trees, right? And you have to remember that, right? And they always, they may take up room and they have a very, what do you call it? They're very big and hard. What do you call it? The hard trunk? No, what is it?
The trunk.
The trunk. Yeah, they don't move that easily, right?
And that's why agility and adaptability will be the single biggest thing that'll determine which companies race ahead and which ones are slower. But majority will be lagging because they're like elephants. And if like part of what we say we do is we make elephants run. We help these big enterprises become more agile and adaptive to change.
You have an Indian background. I actually had another Indian on the podcast, Rameshwar Balanago, who said, elephants can dance. And now you're talking elephants can run. I'm like, what are you people and elephants, right?
All our analogies are around elephants.
So if we take the elephant trunk and the back to trunk, that's another trunk. No, forget that thought. Anyway, but it's so easy. I think it's so easy sometimes to say, we need to consider change management. But change management is like tectonic movements in enterprises. Like it takes a long time. It's very difficult. It's culture. It is. Like I said before, Elias, right? Norbert Elias and the whole interdependency lines, you've made these lines over decades, right? Building up big companies saying, this is how we operate. I trust that we operate this way. We've made C-level, executive levels that are accountable for some precise outcomes. And that's why they're stubborn. That's why, because they own the outcomes of this. So they don't, a CIO doesn't want a CFO to start doing AI shit because he will own the outcome and the problems. And, it all just, adds up to this massive thing, right? And then we add AI to it now, and you say, okay, but the trust you said, because I want to be more concrete in just saying we need change management. So maybe a problem I'm thinking about this is that trust with these AI things is that I trust you. I tend to trust you because you're human, and this is something that I've sort of learned genetically or something like that, over millennia, right? We trust each other because we look at each other. We just know, okay, you have two eyes, you have hands, you look like someone I should trust, right? But now you have an AI that sounds like a human, but isn't. And doesn't this make some weird adoption crap?
Well, one of the things that's interesting.
Can you have culture with AI, Nikki? Can you have culture with AI?
Well, one of the things that's interesting is women are lagging behind in AI adoption by almost 25%. And while there's multiple reasons for that, one of the interesting things is a lot of concerns around bias, around privacy and data security, and even around things like energy usage. Right. There are just things that like women in general tend to care more about and therefore less trusting of the technology and therefore less likely to use it. Well, on the flip side, when you look at the traditional roles and professions that women have chosen are the ones most at risk of AI disruption. And so now you've got a gap where women's jobs are being disrupted. They're using it less. And so now that divide keeps getting more and more exponential. How do you fix that, right? Like that becomes a thing that is not just a workplace problem. That becomes a cultural challenge of shifting mindsets. And at its core, a lot of this goes back to identity. It's reimagining what your identity is in this AI age and who are you in context of AI alongside AI, not just by yourself and not just alongside other humans.
I had Katrine Buck from...
That's a very threatening process.
It is. And I had Katrine Buck from Connected Women in AI talk about exactly this problem, that women are not, in this transformative technology, and what does it mean that they're not engaged and all that. But it can also be that they just know that this is a machine, right? I think I find that sentiment as well, not going essentialistic here or anything, saying women have higher EQ than men, but maybe they do. Maybe they just see, okay, this is a machine, right? Why does it sound like a human? Why is it trying to trick me? It doesn't have any eyes, and men are like, oh, it's talking to me. Oh, it's my new girlfriend. I don't, because I think the other side is also problematic, right? That people don't see this as a machine. I think that's like highly problematic, actually. So at one point adopt it, but at the other point also be critical, always aware. What are you? It is a tool, right?
Yeah. It's a highly intelligent tool that has, for many, gained a sense of identity in your life in some shape or form, right? And depending on how much status and power and control you give it, pretty much determines your level of adoption. And in so many ways, that's exactly like how things work in human society as well, right? Like, it's who do we confer status, power, and control to, whether it's a politician or a CEO and what have you. That kind of drives like what you're willing to accept. But to your point, I think it's being intentional about that and not just accepting something as fact and not just treating something in a monolithic way, because every day the models are getting smarter and it's redefining our interrelationship with it, and we have to determine what do we want that to turn out to be like. And on one hand, I think like I'm deeply troubled by the idea that women are not adopting it, because it's going to have an impact on make the pay gap even wider, have greater displacement of jobs and things like that, right? Those divides have to get closed, but it's also not being on either end of the spectrum where you're completely trusting or not trusting at all. It's figuring out, what does that relationship become?
But this is difficult, right? This is so difficult, Nikki. It's like, it's easy to say, right? But how do you make people excited and cautious, right? Knowing that, you can get tons of benefits, but as you scale the benefits, you also get all the problems. Right.
Well, it's literally the reason Flipwork exists, though. I mean, we
and this podcast exists.
Well, over the last couple of years, like we kept hearing the same patterns emerge, the same questions come up repeatedly from executives and leaders about this growing divide, this almost like a level of overwhelm and inertia because things are changing so fast. I don't know where to start. I don't know what decisions to make. I don't know how to get my people to change. But there's a lot of pressure from boards about saying, you need to embrace this. What's the plan? And not knowing where to start. And really, that's why Flipwork exists, is to close that divide by taking companies through a very structured and systematic step-by-step 90-day sprint that allows their teams, what it really does is give people a safe space, because during that 90 days, when the teams work together, they not only have a baseline understanding of where their current state is, but it meets them where they are based on their archetype, and actually takes them through a structured transformation in those 90 days where they are redesigning their workflows and they are building their agents. So it's unlike, an outside change management expert coming in and telling them, hey, everything you've been doing for the last 20 years is wrong, and we're going to redesign your job, and we're going to train you in this new job, and you're just going to have to adapt to it or you're fired, right? Like, this is where they are creating it themselves. So there's a level of empowerment and excitement that genuinely emerges from that process. And because it's so guided and a safe process, there's, a different kind of transformation that takes place that actually is lasting, and it's a lot faster too.
So it's making them both, excited and cautious at the same time, is that you're saying?
Yeah. Well, they understand the guardrails, right? Because a lot of it is, you don't know what you don't know. So in your enthusiasm, you could, do things that are really dangerous. Or on the other hand, you're so cautious that you're not willing to go beyond basic ChatGPT prompting. So taking them in their competency level, expanding the competency level, but also their level of understanding of how to manage the technology.
So when you sell that, and when you do that, right, you go into companies where the board has said, okay, we've heard we can get 30% efficiency gains by doing AI. Mm-hmm. So we need to do that. And then the CEO said, okay, cool, I'm going to hire Nikki. Okay, because she says cool things and I trust her process, right? And then you come and say, like your banner says on LinkedIn, that people to the power of
people squared,
people squared equals human creativity times contextual wisdom. Those two times agentic scale, and you keep humans very essential here, right? What happens when they like, okay, Nikki, now you need to get me my 30%? Because you have a lot of humans here.
Yeah, well, the efficiency gains are real, though, and that's what's been so fascinating. So we use a diagnostic that measures all of the change and also measures the productivity gains in that process over and over again.
But don't you then get people afraid of it if you do that?
What do you mean afraid?
Yeah, but you meet your process is to get the people in the company engaged in this. Yeah, and at the same time deliver the 30% efficiency gains. So either one will be, disappointed, right?
Yeah. So the biggest thing that happens is actually the release of that capacity and the reallocation of the capacity. That's one of the most intentional decisions that happens as part of this rework. So within 90 days, on average, we're seeing roughly around 40% efficiency gain in that 90-day period. The big question then is, well, how do you want to reallocate that? Is that done at a team level with the leader and the team members together deciding, okay, this means we can take on more customers, or we can provide more customer service, or we can take on that innovation project that's been sitting on the back burner that we never got to, right? So it's all of those things that are done that are actually driving the gains.
But you also have the C people, right, Nikki, in those workshops? Like you talked about
and we do. I mean, that's just the modern workforce, right? I mean, you're going to have that. And what this does, though, it also clearly identifies that even despite getting the bridge to the future, you still refuse to walk through that, and nothing positive came out of that. Companies are going to make, job cuts and reduction in force anyway, right? And it's naturally happening. That happens in any company that's fast growing or just very talent focused. There's always the cutting the bottom 10% type of thing. But this gives clarity on who those people are. But more importantly, it gives them a chance instead of it just being a decision enforced on them. They get a chance to build their skills. They get a chance to cross that bridge. And for the most part, we've actually seen people do that. Maybe not to the degree that an A player would, but you still see a positive net result.
It just seems like, the C person would quickly identify that, okay, this is me, I'm at risk. So, and then they'll be resisting. And then you'll be like, oh, this is a C person. But this C person might actually have been a B person, or could have been a B person, or could have been an A person. But they resisted because they saw what they were doing were at risk. And, people don't like change, right?
Yeah. One of the interesting things that has come out of it that we did not anticipate and wasn't part of our offering or our plan, but really interesting sort of internal job relocation. Where it's like, okay, I'm a C player in this function, but it's partly because this is not my zone of genius. This is not what I'm really passionate about. There's something else that I wanted to do, and I can find my way there because if I stay here, I'm at risk anyway.
Yeah.
Right? So that's that internal mobility, is naturally coming out of the individual themselves, and also the visibility for the leader to be able to do that.
I think that's. But that's really reasonable. But that's also, the shift that always happens when new technology comes in, right? It's just people are afraid that this will be massive, right? Will this be massive, Nikki, do you think? The displacement, of people moving away, or people becoming obsolete, Will it be as massive, right? Can we extrapolate from AI agentic code to everything else, right? Which is currently the best agentic use case. That's why I'm saying it. I don't believe we can that easily, but
I think we will experience short-term pain, and by short-term, I think probably the next 3 years, until there's more adaptation and more use cases of the reallocation of that capacity. In the short term, when you have all the capacity released, you may not have immediate need for all that extra capacity. So it becomes a very simple, and lazy decision to say, oh, we don't need that capacity, and so let's just let go of all those people. Termination is easy. But just like Jensen Huang from NVIDIA said, in one of his recent interviews, the tech CEOs who are out there laying off thousands of people, it's just a lazy decision. Yes. Because if you are a creative leader, you never run out of ideas on how to apply your people. And the gift you're getting from AI is not about cutting 30% of your workforce. It's releasing 30% of overall capacity with the same headcount that you can now apply to something that more strategic and more valuable. That's the real value prop. But the lazy decision is let's just cut them. So I do feel like
right. Be more competitive. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think in the short term, we will see a lot more of the lazy decisions. It's an easy way to get short term gains. I think
it's also been preached by AI people. Not I'm not saying like you and me, but for the last 3 years that to boards 30%, 40%, 50%. I'm like
I actually came across a pitch by an AI tool company that literally said their pitch was you can fire 80% of their people.
Awesome,
that
right.
was literally their pitch.
Yeah.
And and what I was asking them is what happens when you run out of companies where they even need anything? Like when everybody's just gone, well, you're like literally reducing your TAM.
But you also need to, I think you're right about the next 3 years. We need to figure out what the new specializations look like. And that's also why I said earlier that I think it's interesting how I see, this crystallization in developers already becoming more, deep, right? Oh, by the way, I'm talking about AI. My phone just thought I talked to it. Oh, Siri, I didn't talk to you. I don't know what happened there.
Well, I mean, every tech wave has created new kinds of jobs that never existed before, right? Like, can you imagine our parents' generation ever thinking that there was actually a career or a profession called Instagram influencer?
Exactly.
Like, people actually make a really good living. I mean, we can joke about being an influencer, but like there are people making millions of dollars as influencers. That did not exist in our parents' or grandparents' generation.
I think one of the things that I've been thinking, I found this example a week ago or something. It's already fresh, a lot of fresh thoughts. I had this Easter break, right? And I think I've been thinking a lot, apparently. But we in Denmark, we had back in 2000, I don't know, notice something. The tax authorities, they implemented a new system that was supposed to automate debt collection and make all the whole tax process more efficient. And then they fired like 40% of the workforce. But they did that before they were completely sure that the new system worked at scale. And what happened was that so much knowledge was lost. Because the people who left had so much domain knowledge, right?
Institutional knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. Institutional knowledge, right? And I'm so afraid that so many companies are going to run directly into this this, what do you call it, this fault, right? This problem, this to take this route and say, let's get rid of all this institutional knowledge, and doing it just for a short-term efficiency gain to make some investors happy for the next quarter, right? Are we playing a long-term game, or are we playing a short-term game? And we're playing a long-term game. Obviously, we always are. We're humans, this civilization. But does it really? This AI transformation, the way we are making quarterly statements, half-year statements, and all that, is that really good for an AI transformation that's definitely long-term?
Well, I believe what we'll end up seeing is Darwinian at its core. I think it'll be survival of the best. It'll be the survival of the fastest, the fittest, and the strongest. And
those with the
that'll
longest glasses as well, right? Those who look further, those who take,
Right. I mean, it's going to happen at an individual level. The ones that have depth and substance and quality and originality will be the ones that survive and dominate over time. The same will be true of companies. The ones that are doing these short-term thinking, short-term plays are not going to survive the long term, because what happens when you come out of the dip and suddenly there's tons of opportunity and you're unable to attract the talent, and you also suffered the loss of institutional knowledge? That's a hard recovery to come through. The ones that play the long game and are able to redeploy that freed up capacity into strategic initiatives that makes them more competitive, gives them an edge, makes them irreplaceable in the marketplace for their customers, they're going to have disproportionate advantages in that. So I do believe, like, in some ways, every disruption creates this like sort of shaking out of the current status quo, right? And what emerges out of that is the species that are meant to survive long term.
Does that also mean that Does that also mean that one of the biggest things that companies need to be very aware of in their AI strategy, if you could call that, is the attrition of the executive layer? That you need to make sure people stick around for longer, right? Because if they only there for like 4 years, they'll make short-term decisions, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you see that. By the way, I don't know if you came across this recent survey, an article that talked about the number of CEOs that are retiring and naming AI as the reason.
Yeah, I saw that.
Saying that it requires someone who can give it the energy, and it really speaks to that, right? This is a long-term play that requires like energy and dedication to play a decade plus game. But if your roles are like 3 years, 4 years long, you're going to only do things that please the board and please the stock market.
But I don't see that as a trend, right? So we hear a couple of them, right? But I don't see, and that's why those kind of news. I'm like, I read the headlines because it was like, how LinkedIn is, right, and all that. It's not regurgitating. CEO said something, or AI this or that, right, and something, So I saw it. I'm like, okay, a couple of people did that. I don't see it as a trend. I don't see CEOs going around or CFOs going around saying 70%
of them doing that. Yeah.
No, you don't see that, right? So it's like, okay, this is something that's like, okay, it's an interesting thing. It's something we can use as a talking point, but I don't see it as, I don't see people going around resigning their executive jobs because. Do you? Have you met them? Have you met them in person? No.
No, absolutely not. I am seeing something interesting, though, is either almost like a childlike enthusiasm and like feeling re-energized in a new kind of way. Like I was at the peak of my career. Maybe I'm like a few years away from retirement if I choose to. And now this AI thing has happened and it's brought me back to life in a whole new way. Like I feel like I've got 20 years ahead of me now because there's so much I can do that I never imagined. And on the other hand, people that are like struggling, or executives that are struggling with the threat to the status and the power and control and all of the things that they work so hard to earn, that the foundations are shaky. Does that mean there's a revolving door in the C-suite? No, not necessarily, but I am seeing different reactions. And what's in fact, just last week I met with someone who is in their early 70s, and is just so energized, and basically was like contemplating retirement just 2 years ago, and is like, no, I've got 15 years more that I want to give to this.
But you also have, you also have C people executives and A people executives, obviously, right?
Yeah. Yeah. But that's where I do think the Darwinian thing is going to play out. Like, you're going to have people that will just rise up and shine in this process, and those that frankly never had that much substance or guts or, the real sort of depth, and they're not going to make it through this.
I always said, if you don't trust your BI, how will you trust your AI, right? So a lot of people who are not yet adopted your BI, and there's a lot of truth to that in data layers and all that, but that's not the point here. My point is just, if you're a CEO or a CFO and you haven't yet, implemented, the data informed dashboards, right, across the board, you're going to have troubles with AI, right? Yeah. Because you don't trust machines, you don't trust what they tell you. You don't trust any, and that's a problem, right? That's a problem. Could be a problem for the future, right? I want to, now I mentioned it before, right? I read this article, it said, CEO said something, because you mentioned Jensen Huang also just before, right? And there's, how do you feel about all that? Sam Altman said, blah, blah, blah. Elon Musk said, blah, blah, blah. Jensen Huang said, blah, blah, blah. Elon Musk said it. No, Jensen Huang said, if you don't spend $500,000 on tokens, then you're left behind. Okay, surprise, if you don't buy Oreos, you're out of business, said the Oreo factory owner. Is this not pollution? Sorry.
I just think of it as suddenly the tech nerd CEOs have become the new kind of social celebrities. They're replacing the Kardashians for real-time reality TV now.
Do you really? When you're stuck in business friction and enterprise change management and all, you're stuck in that every day. Do you listen to them? Because I don't. I think they're terribly superfluous. They don't even know what a process is. These are the people who think that lawyers will be replaced in a heartbeat, right? You don't even know what people use a lawyer for, right? You just hate regulation. So, but you get my point, right? I think.
Yeah, but it's sort of. I'm going to go back to my Indian roots and bring back the elephant metaphor again, because like that old fable about the blind men touching an elephant, and one touched the tail and thought it was a rope, and touched the trunk and thought it was a tree.
Good one, Nikki. I know that one.
That's basically what it is. They're looking at the world from the perspective that they have in the bubble that they live in, and the problems that they're solving that is very self-serving to their own business success. Right?
But when Nikki Barua says something, it's not like people are going, Nikki Barua said all the time, right? They're going like,
they should.
Yeah, they should, definitely. And by the way, let's hope it's an elephant we're touching, not a tiger, right?
Yeah, exactly. But look, I mean, what's really happened is that they now have a massive global platform, the right timing, and a giant global megaphone. That's what's really happened, because business leaders always spouted opinions. I mean, Jamie Dimon did, and when bankers were the hot thing, and everyone, there were always that kind of thing. Every trend brought about different business leaders into the spotlight. Today, because the disruption is so wide, so fast, and so all-consuming, the spotlight is on these AI CEOs, and they have opinions that are from their view of the elephant. You have to have the discernment to know how to make sense of it. And
so they're basically touching the tail and shouting. They're touching the tail and shouting, "This is the elephant. This is..."
Yeah.
Because everyone hears them, right? I think it's just this. They have so much valuation, and then people think, "Oh, they are successful. They must be infallible. They must, And I'm always like, "Oh, but guys, just whatever they're saying right now." I've talked to people who are like regurgitating what they're saying. I'm like, okay, but go back to your office and see what you're doing. Yeah. How much of that is actually? Can you see what they're saying, in actual life there, And most can't. And that's where I'm like, okay, then we have a different job.
Walk around the cubicles of an office floor and think about whether that has actually changed the reality in that team, in that department, in that workflow. And it's way behind. It's way behind.
Yeah, and don't just say it's behind because they're lazy or they're people. Ask what is making them be
real
behind.
Friction
there's real friction, but there's also value in that friction. There's real customers in that. There's real clients. There's real suppliers.
That's why one of the things I keep reminding.
Processes.
That's why one of the things I keep repeating is automation and efficiency. Chasing automation and efficiency is a race to the bottom. If that's all you're doing, are you really going to automate your most valuable client relationships and hand it off to a machine? Because you've destroyed the most valuable competitive edge you had, right? That is some of the biggest advantages that large enterprises have is the barrier to entry. Otherwise, any startup could become the next big Fortune 500 company. They can't because of the barriers to entry that have taken decades to build, and it's all built around the friction that has become like the walls of the fortress.
And everyone's also on that note also killing SaaS right now. But the problem is if you have massive SaaS like I don't know Salesforce, Workday, Business Central, or D365.
But it's not about this. I mean, Salesforce was never.
Then you have a user base, right? You have people who know it, so you have easier hiring. But if you have all your own, then it becomes more difficult to hire people for that process, right?
Yeah. Well, but if it was just about the quality of the software. I don't know anyone who said Salesforce was the best CRM and the easiest to use and the best UX. It never was. I mean, there are better UX designed software out there. Their domination of the market has to do with their scale, with their distribution, with their client relationships, with the trust that they have in the brand, the customer service. It's all of those things. And their ability to play across a more horizontal integration framework, right? It's all of those advantages. It's not purely about the software itself. And I think that's the part that is massively undervaluing.
Certifications as well, compliance procedures as well.
It's an entire
trust.
Ecosystem. It's the entire ecosystem. It's and so claiming or saying that SaaS is dead and all these stocks are worthless does not consider the depth, the scale of that ecosystem and how powerful it actually is and how resilient it's going to prove out to be.
I think one of the interesting things in that space is that how they're going to have to change into service as a software, and how they're going to have to be an outsourcing partner essentially, right? And how so I'm asking all these software companies when I talk to them, and I always ask them, are you talking to your clients or are you talking to your partners? Because you need to talk to your clients. You need to start taking responsibility for their processes. And not be hands off like everyone is always in their ULES, because you're becoming service as a software. You're going to build agents that are making decisions in your tool, and you need to take some of that responsibility. You need to be close to your clients, and that's super difficult.
I think I do believe that we'll see growth of professional services around that, and whether those are software companies that expand into those spaces and provide that capability, or an ecosystem of partners
that get closer to the customers and closer to the software firm. You need to do both. It's not just you can't be a software partner and just say, oh, I'm building an integration. That's what I do. You need to understand the outcome. You need to have a dialogue with the software firm, and you need to figure out how do we do this service as a software. Right? It's super difficult. I think that's like a crazy change, and that no one's really understanding yet. Anyway.
Yeah. Do you remember in the 90s when ERP was the whole rage and everyone was implementing ERP and all of that stuff? More than the technology, it was the number of consultants that emerged out of that, right? It became this massive industry where the ticket to career success was becoming an ERP consultant, because you were guaranteed projects for 5 to 7 years. There was plenty of work to do, and you had the institutional knowledge that nobody could take away.
But this is so beautiful, right? And I've said that so many times. Every time we can do more and be more productive, we create more complexity. And then then we have, I've said this before. Then we have, then we make weird, complex rules, and then you need to have lawyers figuring out those complex rules. You need to have consultants implementing those complex rules, and you need to have auditors auditing those complex rules are implemented the right way according to the things that the complex lawyer said. And then you have the full chain of complexity, and that is in essence what we spoke about earlier about specialization as well. You need to have someone who's able to build it, someone who's able to say how it's supposed to be built, and someone who's able to control that it's built the right way, right? And those have to be even more specialized to handle the increased complexity.
And therefore, my optimism about the future. We will find a way to stay productive and keep creating so much complexity that you'll always need a human.
The funny thing is that we always end up at some weird way, and this is the magic, I think, of humanity. We always end up, we increase complexity, but we also end up with more surplus. Maybe we are exploiting the earth more. That's a bad thing. But we always get more for ourselves with these processes, which I think is super magic, because sometimes you look at it and think, this is just super bureaucratic, right? But it's productive and it has a margin growth.
Yeah. And I mean, generationally, we have, as a society, gained greater abundance and prosperity all throughout.
Yeah.
Over and over again. I mean, and yes, there are moments in the midst of that change that cause pain, the natural dip that happens before that surplus comes into being. And those are painful moments to go through, but that's the perspective to keep in mind. We are in the midst of all of that transformation. We are in the midst of that disruption. There will be short-term pain, but overall, in a long-term view, we will be more prosperous, more abundant, and have more valuable things to create.
And hopefully
and bigger problems that we would have solved.
And hopefully also better, more sustainable. We could hope for that as well, right? So we will have so people in the future will know what an elephant is when they listen to this episode again. That will be helpful, right? That will be helpful.
Everyone deserves their own.
So in 30 years, people listening, what is Nikki talking about? What is this animal? I don't know. I think I read it once in the children's history. It's an old book and no one knows what it is, It was this weird thing. It's gray and had a weird nose. What's it? No, but also taking care of the earth, right? That's, that's also, anyway, Nikki, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think it's been really great. I think it's been really deep. I think I have tons of notes on my paper, and they all go in multiple different directions. I think we tried to tackle. You don't
have AI notes. You're using pen and paper.
I'm using pen and paper, and I've written my questions. I've written them myself as well. But I actually the conversation just went so naturally across so many different topics that touched upon them, and And I think we went deep on it, and we went in, with the whole city discussion, and then we came back to it, and then it's sort of, it mirrored each other itself across multiple dimensions, and that's exactly what I want, these kind of loops and exploration. I've really enjoyed it, Nikki. I think it's been a brilliant conversation. So thank you so much for that. And before we end, I have a final question for you, which I hope you've prepared for. It's the big one, right? So it's the only constant question. Are you ready for it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Nikki, what is the only constant?
Reinvention. When I think about what has helped humanity in general adapt and prosper, it's because we've constantly reinvented as a society, but more importantly, as individuals. And what it means for me personally, and why that's been the through line of my life and career, really comes down to the ingredients for reinvention. Number one, it takes curiosity. You have to be deeply curious to see what change is happening, where the world is headed, and what it demands of you, and what it presents you with an opportunity of who you can become, the next version of you to emerge. Second, it takes an extreme level of humility, because you go from being the expert to being able to shed all of that and becoming a day one rookie again. Because you can't reinvent if you're still holding on to what you know from the past, whether it's the titles, the labels, the earned credentials. You have to be willing to let it go. And that humility is what allows new knowledge and new growth to come from that. And finally, it takes a tremendous amount of bravery, because you cannot reinvent yourself unless you're willing to be in that in-between space of nothingness, where you are nothing, you have become nothing, you have created nothing yet. And that takes bravery to step into that unknown, be in that uncertainty, take on that risk, and being completely bare. But what comes out of that humility, that curiosity, and that bravery is a version that can change the world. And when you're able to do that over and over again, you not only unlock your limitless potential, but you create value at scale for people in ways that could have never been possible otherwise. And I think that's when imagine more people doing that, that to me makes a better world.
That's a brilliant constant, and now we just spoke about elephants, right? And I just thought, if you want to touch the elephant, you need to be, curious, right? What is this, right? You also need to be extremely humble, right? This is a really big animal.
Crush it.
Yeah, exactly. And you need to, and for that reason, you need to be brave as well, right? Mm-hmm. Because it is an animal that can crush you, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, and that's what the future always feels like, right? Any obstacle that you encounter feels like
elephant.
That big scary elephant. It's an elephant in there that you have to be willing to face. And when you do, and you make friends with it, that's where all of your potential emerges. You often don't know it until you're tested. And to me, why reinvention is the only constant is sometimes circumstances and the environment forces you to reinvent. An example of that was me coming from India to America as an immigrant. The environment forced me to reinvent. I could not still remain the same person with the same mindset and same habits. I had to reinvent myself. Switching from my corporate career to becoming an entrepreneur required reinvention. Circumstances sometimes force that. But what's more powerful is don't wait for external stimulus or catalyst. Reinvent yourself. Do that on a regular basis, because there are no fixed identities. There's unlimited identities available to you.
But this is the only constant podcast, right? So Heraclitus says that the only thing that's constant is change. But then after that, he says as well that it doesn't mean that that change is just something that happens to the river. It means that the river, in order to stay a river, has to keep having this flow of water. It has to keep changing, or else it will not be a river. And I love that, because it means it's an active choice for us to stay a river. Choice. Yeah, and that change. Right now it's AI, right? But that's the elephant in the room, Nikki.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that is. There you go.
But Nikki, it's been absolutely brilliant. I've loved having you on, and let's stay in touch. And thank you so much for this episode and this conversation. It's been brilliant.
Yeah, likewise. I really enjoyed our conversation. It was so natural and so fun, and I'm excited about continuing this again.
Thank you for listening. If you liked this episode, share it with a friend or a colleague.